Okay, we'll get started here in just a few minutes. Welcome to the April 3rd, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. My name is Greg Ondo. I'm presenting from Alexandria, Virginia in the United States. We'll be kind of doing Q&A. So if people, as they're logging in, want to go ahead and introduce themselves. If you're watching this live, feel free to introduce yourselves. Tell us where you're from. If you're watching this after on the stream, you don't have to do an introduction, but we'll just go ahead and for the people that are logging in, we'll give them some time to log in. So usually it takes about maybe 8 to 10 minutes. So if you're watching this on a rebroadcast, you may want to skip ahead. We'll try to have an index of all the topics covered today in the pinned to the top of the comments by tomorrow. So we'll try to get that set up. But if anyone wants to take notes as they're watching and put it in the comments field of an index of topics, that's always helpful and it'll save me a couple hours tomorrow. We don't mind doing it, but we could do that. So let's go ahead. And I know we had some people logging in. We had people that had emailed questions in advance. So if you want to email a topic for a question in advance, you can you can send an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. It kind of gets forwarded to my address, so I don't necessarily see the original email address of the person that sends it. So, it's helpful. I might be able to reply before the hangout if you include your email address in the body of the email. I know it's a little goofy, but it's just kind of how our system's set up while the office is kind of not running as normal with the health situation going on. So we'll go ahead and get started, and feel free to introduce yourself in the comments field, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. And any questions that you want covered in the hangout, just let us know. I see a couple of questions asking how I'm doing. My family and I are all doing well. We've only been out, I think, 3 times in 3 weeks. So just to do kind of, shopping. So we've been kind of sheltered in place and, we're doing very well. I hope everyone else is doing great. So, all right, good to see. Let's go through. We have a bunch of people online here. Let's see where people are from. Okay. All right, so we're having people log in. Appreciate everyone's being able to participate, and thanks for all the great questions. Okay. All right, so we have Millard from Pennsylvania. He was on the last hangout, and a couple other ones. Okay, we have Southern UK. We have Robbie from Dallas, Taylor Sapp from Pine Grove, Michigan, Bolivia, Sweden. Okay, Texas, Brazil, New Hampshire, Norway, Wisconsin, Austin. Okay, so Switzerland. All right, we have Lee from near Manchester, New Jersey. Okay, we have Fleetwood, UK. We're glad we figured there's a lot more people at home these days, so that's why we're kind of have upped the hangouts as well, so the frequency of them. So we've been doing hangouts on Tuesdays and Fridays at this time. Okay, we have Milwaukee, Romania, South Africa. Okay, South Carolina, Finland. We see Grant online. Okay, we have Mark Edwards online. Good to see you. Okay, Nepal. It's probably very early or very late in Nepal. Okay, we have France. We have a question. Is there a general topic for today's Hangout? Generally, we just kind of answer people's questions as they come in. We have Sacramento, France, Sweden, New York, Ireland, Boston, Brazil. Okay. Okay, so getting more people logged in. We'll get started here hopefully in a couple minutes. All right, North Dakota. All right. Okay, we'll wait, and do we have some more people logging in? Okay. We'll get started here, maybe a couple minutes. Looks like a lot of people are logged in already. We have Ukraine. Leicester, I probably pronounced that totally incorrectly. San Jose. Okay, so more people still logging in. Okay, and once people get logged in, if you want to, go ahead and ask questions in advance, that'd be great. Okay. Give it one more minute and get started. All right, some more people logging in. Okay, more people logging in still. Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. One of the questions that's come up on some of the other Hangouts, and I had kind of a brain cramp on how to do it, was to have an LFO control a different element, like for an audio effect that doesn't respond to like a MIDI CC message. So let's say if I'm here, one of the things that we could do is you can introduce LFOs or kind of like different oscillation or changes to different events with a MIDI plugin. So let's say if I'm taking a particular, like something that's really pretty boring. So let's just kind of take this piece and let me adjust the panning here. So if I wanted to take this particular, this pad sound and kind of change that up a little bit. So we'll go ahead and solo the pad. For a MIDI part, a lot of times you can do this quite easily with the MIDI inserts. So we could, in the MIDI insert, activate an auto LFO. And once we have that done, I could say, I want this to automatically send controller 10 in the rhythmic interval of a whole note. So as we do this, this will now just kind of pan. Or we could choose to also just have MIDI volume. And we could also control different parameters of a synthesizer sound. So let's say if I want to take this bass, so let's look at the bass instrument. And let's say if I just wanted to have the cutoff, we could actually just assign this to a particular MIDI CC. You could do a learned function. So once you know what CC that's responding to, we could come again here to the MIDI inserts and at this point say, okay, this is going to respond to MIDI CC 16, and I could have the cutoff of the filter be quarter notes automatically, or let's say eighth notes. We could do like eighth note triplets or 16th notes. And again, that could just make it a little more interesting. So getting this to work with a plugin that maybe doesn't respond to our, to MIDI controllers by default. So let's say if I wanted to come here to my filter plugin. So if I play the drums here, and if I wanted to adjust the position of that filter, but when I right click, there's no learn MIDI CC or go to CC. So what we could do is we could use something like a MIDI loopback, and there's free loopback ones that you could have for Mac and PC. On the Mac, as a part of core MIDI, if you go to your audio MIDI setup, you could activate the IAC bus. So I'm going to just take a particular plugin here. We're going to have this auto LFO, and then this is going to be routed out to the loopback device. We go to your studio menu and go to the studio setup. We will now kind of just come over here, and we're going to add a generic remote, and we're going to use the IAC bus for the input and output. And we're going to say our controller 10, and we want to see what MIDI message is being set. So I'll go ahead and open up the LFO plugin here, and I'll just right click so it's always on top. So we want this to send out MIDI CC 10. So that's what this is going to be. And to actually get that linked, you could actually just do a learn function. And now as we play, we'll play the track here. We could just do so if I have this set to a different MIDI CC value, let's say 11, and then I just click on learn, it's going to capture that. And what I want to do is in the MIDI CC message, when we go to our generic remote, we could say on fader 1, we could say device set to mixer, and then we could say determine the track, and then from this point we want to go and we can see all the different instruments. So I can see on the inserts a dual filter, I want it to adjust the position of the filter of that plugin. So now as we play, and we'll open up the insert for that particular track, and I could change it to be like every measure instead. So that's how you could assign. So again, send a loop back into like a generic MIDI remote, And then at this point, make sure they have that controller message. Choose the channel and choose mixer as the device, the channel, and which particular plugin. And my son, probably like many of you, my son is at home, so he may interrupt the hangout from time to time. So let me go tell him to just hang on 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I apologize for that. So once you have that set up, so that way you could set any plugin to work with LFOs. So a question that I had that was emailed in was about kind of working how to split up tracks into dual mono, or to take a dual mono track and turn that into a stereo file. So how we could do this, excuse me 1 second. All right, sorry once again. All right, so we'll go ahead and so if we wanted to split a particular file to like dual mono or stereo, what you could do is just select the track, and if you go to your project menu, and this came in Cubase version 10, and what we could do is just say we want to convert tracks, and we can say multi-track to mono, and you could give it different naming conventions, and just kind of hit OK, and that will allow you to split the files. And if you wanted to take dual mono files, you could just simply at this point go to the project menu with the track selected and choose mono to multi-channel. All right, let's go through a couple of questions that people have in the Hangout here so far. We'll get to some that were sent in. So I say comment, I don't know why a free version for a couple months just won't activate with an email and a serial number attached. I've never had so many issues with the program, so I'm assuming that this is probably with the Stay Home collection that Steinberg has released yesterday. So, you probably, I haven't gone through the process myself, but I assume that you'll get a digital activation code that you would need to enter in your My Steinberg account. And then you could download that and enter that into this software e-licenser. There are a number of tutorials on how to do that. It probably could be a little easier, but you have to remember that, we don't have full-time staff to change and create a whole new installation and licensing system. And we wanted people to have access to the tools. But if you look through it, there are a number of videos, but make sure you create a My Steinberg account. And then within that, you'll see the e-licenser codes that you could enter in your e-licenser, which is installed with the products. Okay, so we see a question. Tape machine style monitoring causes big delay while tracking. Defaults to the track monitor activation. So if you have a delay when you're tracking, you probably, there could be different ways of handling this. So if you go to your studio menu to studio setup, and let's select the VST audio system here and select the interface. At this point, if you're using a Steinberg UR or AXR interface, you'll have direct monitoring on both platforms. So on the Mac, generally direct monitoring will be grayed out because it's not part of the core audio specification, but you could just activate the core audio or activate the direct monitoring if you have that as an option. And once you do that, that passes the input directly from the output. Sometimes people also can go to the control panel and adjust the buffer size lower, and that can minimize latency. Other things that could cause latency is if you have tracks that have a number of plugins. So let's say if I put on a big multi-band compressor and I have like 6 or 7 plugins in my master bus, that's going to add to the latency of your tracking signal. So try lowering your buffer size and use direct monitoring. And it's not the tape machine style monitoring that's causing the latency. It's latency that's already present in your system that you may not have noticed. All right, so we had a question. Hello, everyone. My question is, how do you set up multiple external MIDI devices, keyboards in Cubase 10.5, and can you have them all opened at once for live play recording? So you can, as you have multiple MIDI devices, I think I just set up my studio in a new house, and I think I have 23 external modules and synthesizers in my setup, so it works pretty beautifully. You need to make sure that either you have the USB driver for the particular device or go into a MIDI interface for your devices. So once you have that done, you could just have, multiple tracks. So let's say if I come here, if I have a track, I could just have this, and once we add MIDI tracks, one track here, could be a montage, let's say a virus, we'll go vintage, D50, Novation, whatever, so you can, say JD 800. So, you could have all of your tracks and have all of your inputs and outputs set accordingly. So once you kind of come here, you could see all of this is where you would tell what output that device is connected to, which MIDI interface. And then you could record all, however many devices you have, as long as you have the MIDI ins and the MIDI outs, you'll be able to have all those devices. Now, a lot of people assume that once they hook up the USB, that all the audio communication also happens. Generally that's not the case. So many people have a dedicated audio interface. So like I have my UR24C here. And some keyboards will pass audio over USB, but generally if you have a particular audio interface, you would need to either have the outputs of all these devices routed to a mixer, or you could set these up as external instruments in the audio connections. Like if you have Cubase Pro, you have external instruments, and here you say, I have a drum machine, I have my montage, it's connected into these inputs of my audio interface. So you would need if you want to do the external instruments, you need to have an audio interface to patch all those different devices. So when I go to have my VSTI, I could just say, okay, I want to go to my instrument rack. I could go to my external plugins. I want it to go to my montage, and that would automatically, we could add the track that would be routed to my montage. And then as we have that montage, we could Also, simply for any of the external devices, we could choose to edit we could edit that, so if we wanted to route it to my different effects and EQs. So if you're working with a lot of different modules, it's common to have them go out into like a line mixer and then feed a bus from your line mixer into your audio interface. You could take the audio outputs, but you don't want to have the audio going over the USB while you have an audio interface, because the two digital clocks will never synchronize. So, you could obviously work with huge external MIDI gear, but, amount of MIDI equipment, but be aware that, handling the audio isn't as elegant as working with a software instrument. So you may have to have an interface with a lot of analog ins if you want to treat it as external inputs, or have a mixer to sum all the different devices. Okay, we'll go to a question since we're here. So we have a question that was sent in from Dom. Good to see you on a Hangout. Is there a way to send MSB, LSB data from Cubase to a MIDI device? Right now, the montage is only able to access GM sounds, and the bank changes on Cubase is ineffective on the montage. So when he contacted someone, Yamaha advised him to get the MSB, LSB data for the individual sound on the keyboard and then send it from the DAW. Any advice? So I think on the Yamaha site, if you could download a patch script. So you could see the MSB, LSB, your bank and program changes here. But, Yamaha has made a lot, and I believe they have one for the montage. It may not be included with Cubase, but a lot of the Yamaha stuff is. So if we go to your MIDI device manager, you could come over here and, you'll see install device. So let's say I'll show you, we probably have a motif in here. So, a number of Yamaha keyboards, obviously. So let's say, I want the motif rack. And at this point, we tell it where it's connected to. And this could be like the USB port. And once we have that done, we could route this output here directly to our rack, and then click here. Then you could see all the different patches. So try contacting Yamaha and see if they have all of the the patch name script. I think Tony Escueda does a great job of creating those. And then you could select via patch names all your different devices. Okay. All right. So going through different questions. Thanks everyone for joining the Hangout. Okay. So my question is how to efficiently work with audio events, example, time stretch with mouse, cut a section, etc. Thanks. All right, so let's just do a new project. So say I just want to do some just raw audio editing on a particular part here. We'll show you some tips and tricks. And we'll just make this really big so it's obvious what's going on. All right, so, you could do a tremendous amount with just the functions that are on the particular system, just kind of right here. So if you wanted to come here and choose a different start or ending position, we could do that. And we could have snap on or off. So if you see where it's only snapping to our grid of a measure when I go to do a change, just hit the J key or click on this icon, and that will turn on and off the snap. So if the snap is disabled, I can freely move this down to the sample level. So we could choose different start or ending positions, and these object selection has different modes as well. So I could also say sizing moves content. So if I want the beginning of this file to or like right where we're at now to start at measure 10, I could just move the contents of the file as we drag it here. Or if I want the ending a particular section to start at a particular time. And the third mode that you'll have is just sizing applies time stretch. So if I say I need this to fit into that amount of space, it'll just simply time compress the audio. Some other elements that you could do. So if we go, with 10.5, they introduced the concept of a kind of a combined tool. So we could have the object selection to move, but also range selection. So if you move to the top, we could just have a range selection tool, and then you could just move a section without even having to cut. So I could just come here, and let's say I just want to delete that, or I think if I hold down, so you have a different range function. So if you say, okay, I just wanted to come here and say, if I hold down Control or Command Shift X, I could just kind of get rid of that particular section. Now, anytime that we have a section, if we hovered near the top, we could do fade ins. So at this point, I could just select this little handle here. So the upper left-hand corner will allow you to do fade-ins. If you want to double-click, you could adjust the fade. So if you want that as your fade-in, you could do that very easily. If you wanted to adjust the overall clip volume, where you could go an additional 24 dB louder, you grab the upper center. If you wanted to just come right there and do a fade out. If you have two clips that are overlapping, you could hit the X key and that will do a crossfade. You could double click to edit the crossfade if you wanted to. And if you didn't want those to be equal, you could have an independent fade out from your fade in. So, all those things are very easy to work with. Some of the other tools that you'll have, so you could cut with the scissors tool, you could mute a part, you could erase a part. A lot of these tools will have other powers as well. So if you hold down the Alt or Option key with the scissors tool, you could cut at even intervals until the end of that selected file. So if you wanted to just, get rid of different sections, if you wanted to mute, you could again click on, or to mute and unmute with the X tool if you hold down the Alt key. But you could also, glue parts together that were previously cut and hold down the Alt key. That will glue all the parts until the end. So there's a tremendous amount of different processing and editing that you could do directly, and if you wanted to listen, or you could choose to switch your listen mode if you wanted to, go from a speaker. There's an alternate mode for scrubbing, so you could be your own DJ. So those are some of the tools that you could do and use very quickly to change some of the audio characteristics. Okay. I also apologize. I have construction in a new house being built right next to me, so you may hear some construction noise in the background. Okay, so hi Greg, Joe from Austin, Texas. How can I import my control room settings after a new Cubase upgrade? The control room and the VST connections presets, they're all, one is to, once you go to your audio connections, if you go to your control room, you could save that as a preset. And often if saving as a preset will automatically carry that over. I've heard of people that, depending on if they're running with their administrator rights or not, can have issues with that. Not translating over. Another method that you could do is if you go to the edit menu, go to your profile manager and save a profile. So you have everything set up and export it, and that will save it to like a USB flash drive, or, put it on your computer or a cloud drive. And at that point, you could go to your new system and just import, and that will carry over all your preferences, your presets for plugins and processes, your key commands, and all of your settings for your audio connections as well. So there's a couple different ways to do that. Okay. Okay, so we see from Grant Slauson, and I know you sent me a message before. Says, "Hi Greg, Grant here from Texas. Your 816C implementation works, but not with the control room enabled." One thing that I found, and I think from some of your messages that you had sent me, Grant, previously, this might be dealing with surround sound. So if you're working with 5.1, one of the things I found, and I haven't tried it recently because I just kind of set it up initially a long time ago, but for my very first monitor, so let's say if I delete this monitor, so your very first monitor that you have set up, and you would set up next one of the monitors in the control room so you add monitor, make the very first one the 5.1. And then if you wanted to do like stereo, have a stereo mixing set, make the other one stereo. But I think if you it makes a difference, or I know it did in previous versions, and I haven't tried it out with 5.1 in a while because I just haven't changed my control room configurations. But try to make sure that the 5.1 is the very first primary monitor system. But I don't have an 816, but I use previous generations of Yamaha interfaces for my 5.1. So give that a try, and I think that may do the trick for you. Okay, so a question from Taylor. Are all retrolog functions available when sidechaining it from an instrument? That's a great question. So, one of the things that a lot of people can miss is when we add, let's say, an instrument track, and let's have it for retrolog. And this came, I think, in version 9.5 a little while ago. So when you go to your retrolog, we'll add a track, is you could have a sidechain input. So I believe that when you send a signal into the sidechain input, you'll make sure that you have this input turned on. But I think it pretty much just uses the filter shapes here from retrolog. So this way you could take like a drum loop and be able to, let's see if I have a drum part here. So I'll just mute. So I will take this particular track and I will, in its send it to retrolog. I think it might be into this one. I don't know. I have multiple retrologs going on a project, but I'm pretty sure it's just going to be the filter section here that is going to be processed when you sidechain into retrolog. Okay. Another question from Taylor is, how can we build our own expression maps? So when you get into when you go to the expression map setup, you could just kind of start here and start building expression maps just directly here. So you could say, I want the remote key to be this slot. What articulation do I want it to be? And then you could just kind of, create the expression maps for different slots. Now, one of the things that's really handy, especially if you use Halion, is you could start with an instance of Hallion here. So I'll just quickly add an instrument track and we'll make it a Hallion track. Is that, we could, some of the plugins will automatically, and I'll do just a quick orchestral thing from Iconica. So okay, so and now as I come over here, what I could do is and we go to our expression map. So I'll look at the macro. So I could see these as my expression map. And as I would add different expression maps here, I could just say, let's say I want to add pits here, and I wanted to add a different articulation here. At this point, I want to, we'll just take these particular articulations, and once we go to our expression map, once we come here on our inspector, I'll close this. All right, and let's say when I go into my editor, and we go to the expression maps, we could just say import key switches, and that would automatically import all of the different articulations that we created in Hallion. So so Hallion, you could automatically import and build the expression maps. With other programs, you may have to actually do a little, create them manually, but a lot of them are kind of freely available online. Okay, so question, can channel changes in Hallion SE be automated to switch sounds being used seamlessly? So when you go, if you have a particular track, and we come over here, if you wanted to switch between different MIDI channels, so let's say if I have a whole bunch of notes here, and let's say if I go into perhaps like a MIDI list editor, this may be more apparent that these would all be on a particular MIDI channel. So if I slide this over, we can see that these will all be on MIDI channel 1. But I could also, let's say I have low notes here. I'm sure it's a lovely sounding piece. And let's say if I go to the MIDI list editor again, and you don't have to necessarily do this in the list editor, but let's say the long notes, I'll just select, let's say that note, and that note. I could switch these to a different MIDI channel. And then, so you could have multiple MIDI channels on one track. So that way, if you wanted to switch, but to do that, you could have your channels be channel specific for the track, but you could also set it to a MIDI channel any. And the MIDI channel any will take that MIDI track and allow you to have multiple tracks work on it. Okay. Okay, so another question from Taylor. When I do a tempo detect on a MIDI or VST instrument, it doesn't seem to track accurately for me. Is there something I may be doing wrong? when you do the tempo detection, you may notice that it'll do some different, there's some different, you could do like a plus, like a times two, divide by two, but it will switch you into, the time warp tool. So, if you find that maybe, and what this would allow you to do is when you activate the time warp tool, and this is just turned on after, and as you move a measure, what that will allow you to do is to actually move the bar to the events. So, if you find that it's not accurate, and then from there, as you move the bar, it will actually do kind of an analysis for all the MIDI information afterwards and see if, and kind of redo that. So sometimes, you could kind of guide it along a little bit with the time warp tool, and it's this tool here, and that allows you to just move the bar based on where the MIDI event occurs. So give that a try, and that's why it kind of puts you into that tool. I mean, for a lot of the things it does really well, but there's some things it just doesn't, it's not going to catch everything depending on, how far out the tempo is. So, but you could definitely try that and use the time warp tool to kind of, tweak it and, have the computer do a tremendous amount of the work for you. Okay, so we have a question. Can a logical editor be used to move MIDI notes from multiple pitches to a single note? Let's give it a shot. So we'll take a look at my fine 21st century composition here. Okay. So I think there may even be a preset for this. So let's go to your MIDI, to logical editor. Okay, so let's just create one. I thought there might have been a preset. So, and if you're not familiar with the logical editor, you could do some great things with it. So we're going to say type is equal to MIDI note. And let's see if we could do set to fixed value. So let's say I want all these to go to B1. Maybe not N1. That may not help so much. Okay, so what I'm doing is saying take all notes and take it to note pitch B1. So that's all you'd have to do. So, so what you want to do in the logical editor, and I know it's kind of, once you kind of play with it and understand kind of the concepts, we could tell what we want a particular function to do. So if I want to delete, transform, insert, extract, select. So what I did is I told it, and at the top is kind of what type of object we're targeting, and that's the filter target, and what we want to do to it. So here we're going to say type is equal to note. And I want to take value 1 in different MIDI messages, and there's a chart in the Cubase manual for like a MIDI note message. Value 1 will be pitch, value 2 will be down velocity, value 3 will be release velocity. So value 1, and then we want it to set to fixed value, and let's say, okay, I want to be to B2, and then just hit apply, and you could save that as a preset. So it'll take all those notes and just knock it to a particular fixed pitch. Okay, so in our question, the marker palette in the toolbar only goes up to 10, and the one in the floating transport goes up to 16. Is there a way to extend either beyond their default limits? I think that's kind of what the markers are set up to do, but let's say if we add a marker track, if you wanted to access other markers, so let's just go ahead and add the marker track here. All right. So, and as you mentioned that you could, see like, some markers within the transport, some within this. But what I like to do is just to come right over here and just open the marker window. And a lot of times for big projects, I'll just have this kind of open on the side. And here you could see, all of the different markers that you want to. And I got a question recently from someone who's like, oh, I want to be able to navigate to marker, 200. And I think there's a keyboard shortcut where, take a look under markers. So, so you'll see that there's like even like a recall cycle marker X. Okay, so there's a key command here called to marker X. And once you activate that key command, it'll just say, what marker do you want to go to? And then it'll give you like a little dialogue, and then you say 113 and type in 113, hit enter. And so that's another way of being able to quickly navigate to markers that are higher than. And once you're here, also, you could, I think it's just N to go to the next marker, or B to go to the previous marker when the marker track is selected. So those are some things that you can do to quickly navigate between your different markers. Okay, so we have a question. How does mixing with VCAs differ from mixing with group channels? I think may have a project for this. All right, I'll just do it quickly here. I'll just do a new project, and I'll just import some drums. That may have been the project I was looking for. Give me a second. Okay, so we'll come here to the mix console, and I'll just take just the drums here. Okay, so and this is a great question of, I get this question a lot of, I wanted to take all my drums and send them to a group or to a VCA. What's the difference? Okay, so I'm going to just kind of draw in some fake automation here. Okay. Okay, so let's say I have some automation. And I want to, we'll come over here to my sends, and I will just send all of the tracks. I'm going to select the tracks here. And I'm going to enable quick link. And I want to, we're going to add an effects channel to the selected tracks. And I'll just put it on a reverb. Okay. Okay, so I'll just get my reverb on all of them here. Okay, so let's say I have like an annoying amount of reverb on all of my tracks here, and we look at, we have our effects channel. So what I want to do is to add a group channel to the selected tracks. So I'll just say, let's add a group channel to the selected tracks. I'm going to make it into a stereo group. So as I come here, I take the volume down. Now we can hear the reverb still. And what my group channel is going to allow me to do is to actually, I could take all of my drums and EQ or run it through a compressor. To do processing on it as a collective entity. Now the problem gets to be when we have automation. So I have tracks that are going up while other tracks are going down volume-wise. So if I automate my group, that's kind of fighting against contrary motion in the automation. And you notice that as I drop the group, that the effect balance between the dry and the affected change. So that's changing the gain structure. So, but if I assign these to a VCA, I'll just right click, and now we'll assign a VCA track to the selected channels. I can now adjust my VCA fader so that it's not going to affect the gain structure to the sends, but as I automate my VCA, we see that even though this is going down, tracks that are going up are still going up, but they're attenuated. And then once I've written that automation, you could just go to, in the VCA folder here. So let's say I have, let's just say I want to, we'll show all volume automation for my drums. So we could see all the automation. And now when we look at it a little more in depth, what we could do with the VCA is to, let's see if we can see a little better here. You may see that there will be different, levels of attenuation. So at this point, you could go to the VCA fader and you could just say, have that automation automatically carry over, and you could attenuate the automation. So the VCA fader is not going to sum. So if you wanted to take all of your drums and do parallel processing, that's great. But if you have a lot of intricate automation that you still wanted to preserve, you could adjust and automate the VCA fader, and it will still kind of retain the tracks that were going in contrary motion. So the group track will sum, and will affect the gain structure going into the effects channels, whereas the VCA fader won't sum and won't affect the gain structure. So it kind of comes from like, how older consoles were automated before they had flying faders, was they would send it to a VCA. So some people loathe the concept who worked with those consoles, and some people love the concept. But being able to keep the automation in different, in contrary directions to the VCA, and still be able to attenuate up or down collectively. And with Cubase, you could just simply have a VCA and a group to the selected channels and kind of work the best of both ways. All right. So good to see Stanley from Poolsville, Maryland. Okay. Okay, so going through some more. Some chances for automation on the same track, not under. So this is probably dealing with, being able to, let's say, write automation and see it directly on the track. So one thing that, where I see people, you could have, two different ways of doing gain. So if you wanted to just grab your pencil tool, you could adjust the gain pre-fader using the pencil tool. And that's really handy for like, regulating vocals. I know, some of the people, work with, the best singers in the world, and this is what they do so they don't have to use multiple stages of compression. So that's one way of doing it. I know some people don't like the method of, having the automation under. And often I find that people, and I've had people get very angry with me at seminars where it's like, I don't want to necessarily have this, and I can't see exactly where the automation is. But if you go to the automation palette by hitting F6, if I keep hitting the wrong key, one of the things that you could do under settings is just say show data on tracks. So a lot of people don't have that turned on. So here you could see the waveform on a particular tracks. So, I think, there's been a lot of requests. I know that, the planning and developers are aware of this, but once you kind of get into it, it's like, where do you stop? Do you want to see, 16 different automation lanes directly on a parameter, and how do you switch between those? But using the, automation panel here, you could say I just want to see panning automation, I want to see volume, EQs, or I wanted to hide all my automation in one kind of fell swoop. So, okay. Let's just go through some more questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. My control room window on the project page has 4 tabs at the top, but the control room window on the mix console page only has 2 tabs on the top. So let's take a look at so I'm not sure which tab. Let's see if it's different if I open up the mix console. Some different tabs may be opened and closed, but I think it's really the same. So it could be maybe that, they could have different states of being open or not. But it looks like it's the same to me. But if I'm misunderstanding your question, just let me know. Okay. Okay, so and I think this is probably from... Okay. So it says, when I mute notes in the piano roll, why do they sometimes go gray, other times disappear? Is there a preference setting for this? So you may have stumbled on a preference. I think it's under editing. And it might be under MIDI, or let's just see editing in general. There's a preference for treating muted events as deleted events. So let me see if I can find a preference. Okay, so there's one under editing audio that says treat muted events like delete it. Let's just see if there's. Just seeing if there's anything for. So I see like this under editing audio for the preferences, but let me just make sure I'm reading the question correctly. Just trying to see if there's just seeing if there is a. Yeah, I'm not sure why I would do that. But, I was thinking of this preference, but I'll see if anything else kind of comes to mind. Tailor it and see if, and if you have a project that you want to email me, you could do that as well. Okay. Okay, so question in control room. I know there's more controls below the talkback bar at the toolbar, but for whatever reason, I can't scroll down to access them. So if you come here, you see the main tab. Try clicking there, and that will expose like the click, talk, dim, the listen, and the dim levels right there. So it seems like you want to click on talk back here, but what this is doing is within this tab, it's automatically expanding it to show more controls. So you have an abbreviated set of controls, and then you can have more controls. So try clicking on the main tab, Greg, and I think that will do the trick. Reading onward. All right, Jeffrey Mitchell got the coveted Cubase socks at NAMM show. That's good. I only got like 2 pair, so I like them. Okay, so all right, I just jumped way to the bottom here. Sorry, our chat had scrolled through, so I may have missed some questions. Apologize for that. Sometimes when the chat gets so long. Okay, just going through questions. Apologize for a delay here. Okay, just reading through comments. Just bear with me for a second. Okay, so So seeing a question, I'm considering buying a Yukon mixing controller. Avid S1. Is Steinberg still updating Yukon protocol with current and future Cubase? Yeah, we have tons of Yukon. We actually co-developed it with Euphonics way back when. So, I haven't heard of any plans to drop Yukon. I'm not sure if Yukon is advancing. It's kind of going into different generations of devices. But the core Yukon, I don't think we'll see that go away. Okay, going through questions. All right, so almost caught up to where we were. Okay. Sorry, sometimes my comments field scrolls all the way to the bottom, trying to make sure I don't miss some. Okay, says, hey Greg, I'm running 9.5. I'm wondering whether I load a new Cubase session. The hub always says it's not connected to the internet. So if you get, like when you go to like a new project, often when you see the connecting, it may be looking for, if you switched your default internet, your web browser, that may cause it. So look to that. I'll see if I can do some reading up on it. But I think if you switch your default web browser to something other than like Safari or Chrome, that could cause it. But I haven't run into that for a while. But I think that's helped some people. So question, will Cubase 10 work with an old Digidesign 002 console? As long as the drivers are supported in the operating system, yes, it will. But if the drivers for the 002 aren't working for the operating system you're running, then Cubase won't be able to access it. Okay. Hi, Greg. Any idea whether Steinberg have in mind to incorporate a FX teleport style networking for Cubase, as it's very much needed with VSTs getting bigger and bigger? Many people are using, and we discussed this on a previous Hangout. I haven't heard, and I think I mentioned I haven't heard FX teleport in, maybe a dozen years. But many people that are doing, larger VSTs or kind of, a very popular system is using like VE Pro. We still have a lot of people doing VST System Link, where you could use like a digital audio connection like a SPDIF or a Toslink or ADAT connection and be able to kind of send MIDI data over. So I haven't heard of any plans for other stuff, but you never know what will happen. But, obviously the computers get, pretty amazingly fast every year. So, but I haven't really heard of anything in that line, but I could ask again. Okay, it says, question, I can use the time stretch to compress, stretch MIDI parts in the project window. The tool's available in the MIDI editor too. I can't see how to use it in the MIDI editor. So for that, it's going to be just in the project window. So, in the MIDI editor, you could think of it as an object selection tool. So I'll just do a new project, or I'll just add a MIDI track here. And, the object selection tool that we had mentioned before, if we have this set to sizing applies time stretch, that will compress the MIDI data just like that on the project window. But the sizing applies time stretch mode isn't in the MIDI editor, but if you kind of you could just kind of take, if you wanted to change the lengths, but, that's a tool that's just on that, but I could pass that on where that can make sense within the MIDI editor. But, if you have the lower zone editor and just kind of switch that mode. You can see how that automatically works between those two, but it's not in there's not alternate modes within the key editor. So, okay, going on. Could you talk about more what casting and molding does in spectral layers? Okay. I got a bit swamped with other work this week. So I know I said we tried to do spectral layers today. I will try to have it together for Tuesday. I'm sorry. It's just, I had a number of work things come up. So I will have it for the next hangout. And I apologize, Jamie, because I know you emailed earlier about that. So, all right. And my son's trying to invade. So give me a second. Let me just mute the mic here. Sorry about that. I'm back and it's probably playing music weirdly for you. All right. Okay. So, I see a question. Show hide plugin Windows doesn't seem to work on MIDI plugins. Why is that? I think the intention was for the audio plugins within the mixer, but I think it does, it could be applicable to MIDI plugins as well. So I will take a look at that and pass that along. Okay, so I see a question. Reset button in frequency doesn't work. So let me just try to open it up. Do a new project, switch to a different project here. Okay, so I think I had the frequency, EQ in this project here. So what you need to do with the reset button, so if you've done like a horrible EQ, you want to not just click on it with the reset button, but hold down the Option or Alt key, and that'll take you back. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. I heard a rumor that the channel strip is getting revamped. Is this true? It's pretty significantly revamped for version 10. I haven't heard of anything for that, but they often don't tell me stuff because they know I speak with lots of people all the time. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. I'm missing the factory sounds from Prologue. Discoveries is showing, but not factory sound set. So make sure if you're missing some sounds, try going into your media bay. This is something you could try. And then if you go to the VST sound, and just make sure I have the right plugin, I think is Prologue. See if I even just take a look. I'll just. So, the one thing that you could try to do if you're missing some of the presets, if you go into, let's say and let's see if it's in here. And so if you go to factory content, VST3 presets, and then under the Steinberg Media Technologies, try going to your Prologue here and just try rescanning the disc and see if that makes a difference. Often that will find missing content. Okay. Okay, so seeing that nice comment from Robin, thanking me for the Hangouts and hope people, and that it's been helpful and he's learned a lot. So that's why we do these things. Okay, so we have a question. Video window disappears when going from project window into audio editor maximized window. So let's just go to our video player window here. So let's say let's do audio editor maximized. So when we do that, and my video window seems to stay. So see if I'm doing something differently than you, Alex. Okay, so let's read through a couple more questions here. It says, I also had the effect that when editing a MIDI event, the cursor returned to the start of the event. I spent a half hour searching why this behavior had changed. So let's take a look. So let's just see if maybe there's a preference that would cause this. Yeah, so maybe, I'm not sure if I'm doing it right, but I think what you're saying is when you select a note, the cursor returns to the start of the event. So I'm not having that when the event is selected. But if I'm misunderstanding, let me know. Okay, question. My audio connection panel tab show the selected name font in white, which makes it difficult to read. What is the active one? Why and how to change such colors? Thanks in advance. Yeah, I've kind of brought this up before. I think it looks like in 10.5, I know that when you would select it, and it could be a PC versus Mac thing that you'd selected, that it was hard to read the currently active tab. I could check it on PC and see if that makes a difference, but here it's it's a bit more obvious with the colors. So, but I know what you're talking about. I'm not sure if it was changed. Okay, so getting back to the selection of the event. So, yeah, that would behave if you have the use video follows edit mode. So, your comment, Robin, thanks for giving us a little more information. So question, how could a track be affected to more than one VCA at a time? Thank you. Let's give it a shot. So we'll get to the mix console. Here's activate the project. Just remove this track quickly. So it doesn't look like it, and I can see where that can make sense, but you could add VCA tracks to other VCA tracks if you wanted to. So you could have like one VCA for all your kick and snare, one for hi-hat, one for toms, and have those VCAs routed to their own VCA. All right, so question, is there a way to create a logical editor preset that when you create an effects track, it colors it a certain color and pulls it into the effects channel folder? I think we might be able to do it with the Project Logical Editor preset. So when you go to add an effects channel, so generally you'd have an effects channel here. So if I go to add an effects channel track, so let's just say I'll just add an effects channel without sending it. So, okay, so we'll add an effect, and you get this prompt if you want that to be inside the folder. So if that is selected, it goes directly into let me just, so we see our effects channels here. So now when we go to add an effect channel, if we choose inside the folder, it gets placed in our effects channel folder. If I do that, let's say I'll have just, let's say a delay. So now I hit add track, inside folder is added. It's in the folder. If I have this track selected and add an effect channel and I choose outside the folder, it will put that effect channel directly below the selected channel. So you don't need a particular, so you would need to do a logical editor preset for that. Now, if you wanted to, you could combine, if you wanted to, say, when you create an effects track, you wanted to color it a certain color and puts it in the effects. Well, to color it, if you wanted to, as it's added, let's say, then you could make a project logical editor preset, and you could say, not a logical editor, but let's say a project logical editor. And I'm going to say property is set to event is selected, and then you can say set color to fixed value, and then you could have that. So you could save this as a preset. So you can say if the track is selected, automatically colorize it that color. And you could make a macro that adds the track and then runs a particular project logical editor preset with the predetermined color for you if you want. So while it's not a project logical editor, you could kind of combine, but inside and outside the folder is really as you add the particular effect channel, or you could choose whether you want it to be inside or outside the folder, and it'll kind of keep the setting that you last used. Okay, so I'm just seeing from David, can you show how to connect it to a CC? So let me just see. I'll scroll back a little bit and see. Maybe if you could expound upon that a little bit, that would be helpful. Okay, so it says, Greg, how do I use my WAV file sample libraries to make a track? Not done this before. I've bought some new ones. So a lot of times if you have, a WAV file, if you bought just like samples of WAV files, you could, one of the things you could do is to activate it. If you wanted to play back just a single sample, is you could just go to the sampler control, and you could take any WAV file that you have and drag that into the sampler track. Another method would be to, you could go directly to Groove Agent SE. And Groove Agent SE would allow you to build an instrument that had multi-samples. So you say, I want that sample on that pad, this sample here. And you'd probably get, more appropriate samples. I'm just kind of randomly selecting some here, but this. And you could drag, and then you could trigger these via MIDI. So, sometimes you may have samples that will automatically, be mapped for particular instruments. But if you have just a collection of WAV files, you could just, try playing around with Groove Agent. You can make your own samples very extensively in your own instruments using Halion if you want. But, that's some easy ways of kind of, taking different samples that you purchased. Okay, how can I isolate Pro Tools 11.5 to Cubase Pro 10.5? Probably what you want to do is if you go to the transport, go to activate, you want to go to your project synchronization setup. And probably what you want to do is make sure to have a MIDI cable or an IP MIDI program. Say you want MIDI timecode, and then at this point you want it to be sent out of this port. And then as you hit play, it's going to send MIDI timecode out, and you could have the other program or drum machine or sequencer lock to MIDI timecode. Put that into external sync, tell it to look for MIDI timecode, and you should be in sync. Okay, going. Okay, just going through. How do I render a send effect only? So let's say I have too much reverb going on there, and I wanted to just render the effect itself. I'll take just kind of a small portion of it here. And within, if we go to Cubase, we could go to your file to export, and we could say audio mixdown. Here you could say a single file, and I could just say I wanted to take my effects channels, and I could just say, okay, we're going out to reverence, and then we could, create an audio track. We could export, have that automatically inserted. Hit OK, and now you could just have your. And if I did the right effect, you could just have the effect. So all you need to do is when you go to File, Export Audio Mixdown, you could do just a single file, or you could do multiple and just say I wanted to render all of my effects channels or just particular effects channels, and you could then have those printed in so you don't have to worry about it. Okay. All right. I appreciate everyone's understanding Ryan's knocking and interrupting. All right. His TV show ended, so I had to. He's been good doing his homeschooling. Okay. Okay. Going through questions. Okay, what is the best way to audition Groove Agent styles from one after another? For instance, I'm looking for a nice 6/8 blues pattern, main intro, and I want to check what's available. Sorry if you could hear the construction workers behind me. I think they're not supposed to be working, but they seem to still be working. Okay, so let me see if one of the things that was added in version 10, let me see if this. Okay, so if you come here, let's say if we have styles, so let's say if I have a pattern here, try going over here. You see this little file menu, then you could go to different styles. And just you could load up. And you could see all the different styles are on your system. So if you wanted to say, okay, let's go to blues. So that's an easy way to kind of audition through your different styles in Groove Agent. So again, you want to make sure that you click on the little file tab, and you could audition different, instruments or kits kind of in the same pattern, but just click on your styles and then kind of go through, and you could audition all your styles pretty quickly. Okay, so question, blue license key works on USB 3, USB 2 and laptop? Yes, no problem inserting into USB 1, USB 2, or USB 3 key for your dongle. And I think ALO had sent in another question in advance asking if it's okay to take your e-licenser and connect it to a dongle and always connect the dongle or connect the, not the, take the e-licenser and connect it into a USB hub rather. So it's no problem to connect it into a hub and then just, disconnect and reconnect the hub a zillion times if you need to, and just simply replace the hub if necessary for, connection issues. That's what I do with my computers when I travel. I have, like an e-licenser, an iLock, and my mouse, my wireless mouse, and that's always connected into a USB hub, and it's no problem. And I find it works great. Okay, so the question, I see this all the time on different Facebook groups. What should we do for vocal suite mixing? So similar questions. So let's give you a couple tips. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. Appreciate your patience. I may have to refresh my license here. All right, so I got a message earlier. I have kind of a dealer license, and I may have to refresh it. So let me see if I could do that quickly here. And I think this is why we're getting a little issue. Sorry, my license to run is a little different than. I may have to exit out. Hang on just 1 second. I'm just going to exit out of Cubase really quickly here and reset my license. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so I'll restart my Cubase. I think we should be good. I usually try to, my license can expire with a number of starts, so I sometimes have to reset that. Okay, so getting vocals to sound, let's see, sweet. Okay, and let's just make sure. I have to reset my interface. Thanks. Sorry about that. I should have checked that before we started. Okay. And sorry, I just killed everyone volume-wise. Sorry. So if I want to take like a vocal here, I can show you kind of what I've done on this track, and we can listen to it in context. And we'll start kind of from the beginning. I'm kind of a believer in kind of do what you need to, and some people will choose never to EQ that much, but depending on the EQ, just to kind of make it cut through the mix. So this is dry, and let's say without the EQ. And just a little bit of revelation. I'm just using a plate reverb preset here. So again, without a decent sounding vocal, but maybe not sweet. So you can really hear kind of intelligibility. So, I see people that have sometimes really outrageous vocal chains of like 15 plugins, and I think they would tend to kind of fight against each other a lot of times. So, I use, I could be a bit more traditional personally, but, just a nice reverb and a little bit of EQ. I don't even think I may have a little bit of, I have some compression and a gate here. And just a little bit of de-essing on it, but nothing so heavy-handed. So those are some things that you could do. So it says, Greg, how do you master an electronic music dance track? A lot of times what you could do is just on the master bus is, a lot of people will run, limiters are very popular for a lot of dance music. People will run like, multi-band compressors. Check out the multi-band envelope shaper, can do some wicked things as well. So when you come here, you could actually choose to, adjust the attack, decay, almost like a transient designer, but on different frequency ranges. And those will be some great plugins to start working with. So play around like the multi-band compressor and expander, and then you should get some great results to start with. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. How do I sync a hardware keyboard and to play along with software in Cubase 10.5 and record the sounds from the stereo out of the hardware along with Cubase Groove Agent? So, what you would want to do often is, go to your synchronization setup under transport, and you'll see a project synchronization setup. And as we go here, you could send, if you wanted to just come here, you could send MIDI timecode. You could also send MIDI clock out to the device. You wanted to have that device look for external timecode. You want to tell it which interface that you want to send MIDI clock or MIDI timecode. So depending, some of the older drum machines would do MIDI clock, depending on what your device syncs to. Some will only do MIDI clock, some will do MIDI timecode. So just simply come here, take that, tell what port it's connected to your keyboard. Then when you hit play, your keyboard should be set into an external clock or external sync. Just, hit play. You should see the keyboard chase to Cubase, and then take the audio output of the keyboard and patch it into like a stereo or a multi-track input, depending on what you need to capture from that keyboard. But it's very similar to like the question earlier about syncing to another DAW. So, okay. Okay, so I think we covered some of the stuff with vocal mixing. So with the sweetening. So it says I use Cubase, I use 10.5, but sometimes I want Cubase 8 for replace audio in video option. My old Cubase crashes or can't do this function anymore. What happened? I reinstalled it and updated eLicenser. Depending on your operating system that you're using, when Cubase 8 came out 5 or 6 years ago, that could be, especially on the Mac platform, it could be that your current operating system doesn't work with Mac. That the 8.5 isn't compatible with that particular operating system. But if you want to do the, replace audio and video file and you have 10.5, just simply go to your file menu and choose export, and you see an export video. And this will take the audio and virtual instruments and all your automation and mixing and actually embed it directly within the video file. And unlike the previous version, you just do your mix down here. You could choose just to do a portion of it. So even if your video file is longer, then if you've been scoring just a particular section of the video and you have video before and after, you could export just a very specific region. So you have the with 10.5 where you could do the export to video directly in the project here. So just use that, and you don't have to go back to 8.5. Okay, we have a question. Hi, Greg. Can you please explain the difference between mid-side, left, right, and stereo that can be used with frequency, especially when EQing drums and bass? Okay, so what the frequency, and we'll just show it, and it's the same concept for any of the plugins. So let's say if I want to have my frequency EQ, and what's great about the frequency EQ is this ability to choose. So let's say of what I want to adjust the EQ on. So if I have it on a stereo track, by default, and we have this particular project, I could adjust the left and right. All right, so that's the default behavior, and that's why you see ST here. But let's say I had a piano, and it was a little bass heavy, and I had a stereo mic. Here I could put it into left, right on one particular band. So as I EQ, I could EQ the right hand, just the right channel, independently of the left channel. So that's only in the right channel, and this is only in the left channel. So that way one band of EQ could do EQing on the left channel and right channel independently. Now the other mode that you have is mid-side, and this could be like really important, especially for bass and kick drums. So what we could do is as we adjust our mid-range, so we could think of this as not as mid-range, and and it was a bad term for me to use, but this is like the middle part. Let's say this is our left, middle, right. This EQ will now affect the middle part of the panning spectrum. So if I wanted to boost the middle part of the panning, but I wanted the edges to be brighter. So the the sides, will take the left and right kind of edges. If we were to imagine this is left, center, right, it's going to take this part of the panning spectrum for left and right on the edges. That's what the side's going to do. And the mid is going to allow you to do processing just on the middle part of the panning spectrum. So if you're doing like kick and bass, mid-side is a really powerful tool to work with. And a lot of times people will use this as a technique, like on a mastered track. There's a lot of mid-side stuff. So you wanted to take the mids and be able to just kind of, do processing to get rid of sibilances on vocals or to tame snare drums. So again, you have, and this only, if you put on a mono track with the frequency EQ, you're not going to really notice those benefits because it needs two channels to work with. So you have mid-side, the middle part of the panning and the sides. stereo, where it's going to treat one band, can treat that, and left to right, where they could be independent of each other. So each band could do that independently. So you could have, even though you think of it as an 8-band EQ, you could have 16 different EQs, depending how it's configured. Okay. What is the trick to use hardware and have it record at the same time? Is my software in Cubase 10.5, for example, hardware keyboard for hardware for a Linn drum machine along with the Hallian. So yeah, I think we covered that with the sync. So I see a question, how do I export 4K video in Cubase 10.5? Currently, the video implementation is just for 1080p. So most programs, I think there may be only one program, if that actually allows you to work with 4K video. So if you need to deliver a 4K video with the video, you'd probably have to do that in an external application. Now, the video engine that we've seen so far, this is the first iteration of it. There will be more stuff coming, but practically, it's very rare. Even like our top film composers are actually composing to 4K. So you could down convert it or convert it to a 1080p. That's a much more common resolution to work with. So just a heads up with that. Okay, question, how to do MIDI compilation in Cubase Element 10.5. So let's say if I have, let's say if I just come here. Okay, and I wanted to do, and I think this might be like a comp track question. So let's say if I want to, I'll just grab my range selection tool here, and let's say I want to put it on a cycle record. Now you could go to different MIDI record modes here at the bottom. So we could say I want to do in cycle mode. We could choose to do new parts or to merge or to replace. So I'm going to do new parts and stacked. So now every time that I would hit a MIDI note, okay, so at this point I could, and I think this works in Elements, I'm not absolutely positive, but once we've done that, each of those MIDI events would automatically take their own lane, and then you could use something, I think you could use the comp tool. I'll set this to, I'll set my snap off and not to bar so we could actually see. So at this point, you could say, I want that section from that take, and you could select different MIDI performances. So give that a try. I'm not positive that does it in Elements, but that's how you could do it in a full version. Okay. Okay, question, how to export some WAV files in mono and some in stereo. Okay, so the channel configuration is kind of based on the output routing. So, and there's kind of an easy way to work on this. So let's say if I wanted to go to another project very quickly with some drums. Okay, so let's say, I have drums and I want my kicks to be exported as mono. Let's say my kick and snare, I want those to be exported to mono. So I could just simply take, let's say I want my kick, snare, all those to be exported as mono. I'm going to add like real quickly, and I think we could just do it right from here. I'm going to add a group channel to the selected channels, and I'm just going to make those mono. Okay, so, and at this point, let's say I'll just do a quick export. And because those particular tracks, or I'll do it another way actually. So let's go to my audio connections. I'll just undo. So I'm going to go to my audio connections here. And under my outputs, I'm going to add just a mono bus. It's not going to be connected anywhere. And I know this is kind of a goofy workaround. And at this point, I will go to my routing here, and I want all these to go to my mono out. So I hold down Alt Shift, and those tracks will now all be sent to my mono out, and the rest will go to my stereo out. So I'll do just a small portion here for time's sake. We'll go to export audio mixdown. I'll do multiple, and then I'll just say, okay, I want my audio channels, my instrument tracks, and we'll just create a new project. So we could see that like my kicks, were automatically routed as mono and my other tracks as stereo. So let's just make it a little. So mono, then the hi-hat, I think I had it as stereo. So that's how you could do it. So assign, in the outputs, in the audio connections, I always have like just a dummy mono bus for that. And then before you export, just simply route whatever channels you want to be mono into that mono bus. And then you could do mono and stereo simultaneously. Okay. Okay, so I see Mark Edwards and Don Moffitt. So we usually meet up in our Club Cubase in New York City every month, which was normally scheduled for last night, but obviously didn't happen. So good to see you guys on a hangout. Okay, so question, is there an easy way to change mono channel to stereo and vice versa? And I get this question a lot with like different effects, so the inserts will follow the, channel width, which makes sense. The sends will be, can be set to other channel width. So, I know a lot of people want to just insert everything as inserts and then be able to toggle between stereo and mono, but currently as it's set up, and I know there's discussions going on about different implementations of this, that inserts will follow the channel width and sends that are sent out can be sent to different channel configurations. So, but there isn't a switch currently. Okay, let's go through more questions. Thanks for all the great questions. I hope everyone's learning a tip or trick. So if you've learned something new and you like the Hangout, you could give a thumbs up to it, and you could always subscribe to the channel and get to make sure you're notified of other videos and other events. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Is there a quick way to switch off the monitor button for all tracks that have it enabled? So let me just go back to. just check the key commands really quickly. So I think probably if you just set, let me see if I set a key command. So that'll do it on a selected channel. Let me see if there's a way of doing the key command. Otherwise, see if there's like a toggle monitor status. You may be able to do it in a project logical editor. So let's say property is set. We just see if there's a container type. I don't think that will. So you could, looking for just a way to globally do that. So you can assign a key command, but that will do it for kind of the selected track. I'll just try one other thing quickly. Okay, so let's say if I have multiple tracks, monitor enabled here, but only one is selected. So you might be able to, I'll play around with the project logical editor, but you may be able to do something kind of like this where you could do it, but you could set your own keyboard shortcut. So I'm sorry about that. I'm going to toggle back over to, I know we had a bunch of questions that were sent over. Okay, so we had a question. I bring all my drum tracks back to an analog console. I have two toms I want to send out to an outboard stereo compressor and bring back to the console on two separate tracks. There are a few ways I can do it on a console, but is there any way to assign a mono from the track to two different outputs? I know I can do the effects channel fix, but just wanted to check on the actual channel. So one of the things that you could do if you need to send to multiple destinations, let's go ahead and just do this, open up the large mix console, and there's in the racks, you have a function, and this is in Cubase Pro and also in Nuendo, which I think this customer is running. So at this point, you could have direct monitoring. So you could send this out to multiple destinations. So let's say I'm going to add a group channel. And I'll just go ahead and add two group channels. So at this point, I could say I wanted to select these, and I would send all of them, and I'll hold down Alt-Shift for a quick link or Option-Shift on Mac. And I could send those all to group 1, and I could send these all to group 2. And a little hidden gem, if you go just to the left of the racks, you could see direct routing summing mode on. And here you could say, I just wanted to send it to this group and to that group simultaneously. So you could take one source, send it to two different groups, and then each of those groups you could route to different outputs if you needed to. So we had another question about external MIDI controllers, how to set it up and use. Some plugins have MIDI learn, some do not. how to map those who do not have it in quick controls and VST quick controls, how to get them to respond to an external MIDI controller, and how to use those functions. All right, so it's a great question. So let's say one of the things that you probably want to do is when you go to your studio menu, go to Studio Setup. And from here, you have track quick controls and VST quick controls. So we could set these up for, like I have a Nectar Panorama. So I'm going to set this up as my MIDI input for these particular devices. So we could just come here, turn that on. Okay, and then we could just see a learned function. So I could select this, and you can move a knob. So I say, okay, move a knob. I go here, I move a knob. Okay. That's up. I didn't go down, sorry. And what this is doing, you see in the address, the MIDI controller is automatically capturing the MIDI message that's being transmitted by the knob. So now when I wanted to go to, let's say, our track quick controls, we could do the same concept. So when I'm in my quick controls, we could say, now I just want to go to my track quick controls. And now as I would move my knobs on the control, we could do this. Now to add, if we have like an instrument, at this point, we could go to the quick controls for the instrument. And now my knobs are automatically just controlling those particular parameters. Now, if you don't like the choice of the quick controls for the instruments, all you'd have to do is right click and say, move this to slot 1. Then that would change that parameter and you could have different controls just by moving your knobs. So that's how you could kind of get it set up for external MIDI controllers. And once you have that done, you should be, good to go with that. And that way you have kind of like 8 go-to parameters for the instrument or for the audio track. And if you have 8 knobs, you won't have to sit there and remap everything. And if you go to like a channel quick control, you also have different presets. You can say, I just want to see my volume pan, low cut, high cut, on, or just go to my sends level. And then you could just have your sends automatically carry over. Okay. So question that was sent in, I'm trying to control some stuff in my Garrettson personal orchestra. The control CC numbers are listed in the plugin. I just don't know how to map the incoming signal from the BFC 2000 I want to use to control the CCs to those CC numbers. When I click learn, it shows an address for each one, how and where to use this, and how to use this to the quick control stuff. So a lot of times, I think the BFC, and I think this might be like kind of a Mackie control device. Sometimes those aren't, set up by default to actually, to transmit MIDI controllers. So you have to make sure that it's going to actually transmit, a MIDI message. But it's really going to be very similar to what we just did, just kind of learning, those particular controls. So, and it could be, just getting a little box that outputs MIDI CC. So if it's not learning, you could always check to see what knobs, if you're looking for a way to see which particular parameters are being triggered, or being sent out. If we add a MIDI track here, I can now just click on a MIDI track, and then as an insert, there's a plugin that you could have called MIDI Monitor. And this will just, whatever your button you're hitting, whatever knob you hit, this will just, control, and you could see what MIDI messages are coming in as you transmit or send MIDI information. So you could make sure that that's actually outputting MIDI by doing it there, and then just set it up in the quick control. It could be that there's a lot of Mackie control type units don't actually output MIDI CC. So, and then, but if you're not seeing it, learn here and just kind of reread. So there's a good chance that that device isn't sending out MIDI CC. So check that. Okay. Go through another question here. Okay. Let's see. Just reading through. Okay, is it possible to settle the record level dispute? Majority of forums seem to agree on RMS is minus 18 dBFS full scale. Is that really necessary? A lot of people do not have the ability to separate monitoring level from input level. Minus 18 dBFS makes it hard to hear anything else and requires workarounds. What gives? There is no perfect level, just don't, try to give. I know a lot of people try to aim for minus 6 or minus 12 dB on like their Cubase meters, and they kind of aim for that, knowing that there's going to be, they want some additional gain if necessary, makeup gain. They don't want to make the mastering engineer jobs, significantly harder or more difficult. So to give them a little bit to work with. And a lot of times, depending on how your hardware is calibrated, minus 18 dBFS could be a 0 dB in your DAW, depending on hardware calibration. But, I don't necessarily worry about that. I try to keep it personally, I try to keep it about minus 6 dB. I know some people try to keep it minus 12 dB on larger projects as they're, working with a lot of things. So you could always add gain pretty easily afterwards. So, don't worry about necessarily the rules. And sometimes, with some people find following kind of tried and true concepts from analog days that they translate well into the DAW, and some people just totally ignore it. And I find that people do both get great results. Okay, so let's see. And a question on load program dialog box does not remember neither resizing nor placements. It's annoying with 3 monitors set up. Constantly shows up between 2 monitors. Would be nice if developers could program in something and make it remember size and location. So let me just look at this very quickly. Load program dialog box. So I'm not sure if this is in like a VSTI where you run into this. So let's say if I come here to the instrument, so I think it might be referring to this window. And let's see if that will recall. So it might kind of move it to the center, and there's I'll mention that to our developers as well, and see if there's something that they could, if it makes sense, to them as well. Okay, when I open Cubase, a message pops up, everything saying that a couple plugins could not be found or weren't active. These were demos I tried. I went through and tried to delete them, and even went into the files and got rid of them, but I can't get that message to stop popping up. What can I do? So I'm not sure if this is a third-party plugin or a Steinberg plugin. So I'm not sure if you've tried to just go into, if it's a VST3 plugin, if you go into your VST plugin manager, if you've made collections and you've excluded them, you could try that. And I'll just reread it again. And it may scan upon boot up, but if you go into like your VST 2.x plugin paths, and they could be different on Mac or PC, if it, make sure also that, I've seen sometimes people have a trial version plugin, and when they do that, they still have a plugin saved within their template, and the template is referencing the plugin. I haven't seen it really reference a plugin that was uninstalled, but if it's being used and you're starting from a template, make sure that you don't have any instances of that in a particular project or template that you're working from, because that could kind of mess it up. Question: when I insert a song to use as a reference track, I notice that the waveform is much smaller than my song, but somehow the real songs are still louder. How is that possible? And how does that work? That's the secret that many people want to figure out, and what years of experience and mixing and compression can allow you to do. Sometimes, you just import a track and you think it's going to be this huge waveform, and then you listen to it and it's not, and it's just mixed really well, and it's arranged really well, and it's a great performance. And those things kind of can make a big difference that aren't necessarily reflected in the size of the amplitude of the waveforms. Another question: I noticed that there are two kinds of ways to load VST instruments. One is just the instrument on its own, one channel, and that's all. The other adds the instrument and two other tracks under VST folder. One of those other tracks controls the output of the plugin, so it's kind of confusing trying to automate the volume, because you have to use the output channel. Is one of these types better than the other? Why does one send to another channel, but the other one is all in one? So there's instrument tracks and instrument racks. And the origin of how it started was, we started with like an instrument rack. And we could see this when we go to our VSTIs, that we'll have rack instruments and track instruments. So an instrument rack was very much conceptually the same as having a rack of MIDI gear, where often one instrument, so for instance, if we open up Halion, you could have 64 different patches loaded within a single instance of Halion. So an instrument track would allow you to have multi-timbral capabilities and have multiple outputs. A lot of people wanted a simpler, faster way where we can have one stereo output and the instrument, everything consolidated. And that's what an instrument track allows you to do. So because people had worked with the previous paradigm for a long time, we couldn't just take that away, because some people preferred that, especially when working with multi-output, multi-timbral instruments. Over time, some of those differences have kind of changed. So now we could have a multi-output instrument track. So, if you have a instrument track like Groove Agent, you want to have multiple outputs, that was enabled. So why you have different, when we add an instrument to the rack, so let's say if I add a synth here, we can see, okay, I'm going to have my Halion Sonic, that will load up that particular instrument. And then we'll see it's going to add the MIDI track. And what we see here is the MIDI volume, like MIDI CC7. And that's helpful because a lot of people still need to draw in MIDI volumes. And then you also have the audio characteristics. So, and to access the audio characteristics, you could see this feature right here in the inspector. So you see the inspector, here's like all the MIDI CC. And then when we go to here, we could click on the audio characteristics of that particular channel. So this is where we could do that. So you could access it all from one simple place, but it is nice to have for people who are doing a lot of MIDI volume messages. We could have MIDI CC volume that's independent of the audio volume. So, but if you want to simplify everything, just keep it as an instrument track. All right, so we'll move on. Is there a way to insert audio into video in Cubase 10? I could do it in the previous version and couldn't get my hands on Cubase 10.5. I've been doing it in our program, but it takes too much time. I'm sorry, my son is knocking. I'll try to get to him in just a second. So with Cubase 10.5, it has the it has the export to video. But if you want it in Cubase 10, that feature doesn't exist because they rebuilt the video engine. But you could go back to 8.5 or 9. There's previous versions that you could just simply load up with your Cubase 10 license and do the replace audio and video file. But if you want to speed up the workflow, definitely upgrade to Cubase 10.5. Okay, could you talk about the camera icon plug-in snapshot feature? And it's from Dave Miles Huber. So when we come here, we could see, when we go to our, if I wanted to look at all of my VST effects, we could have a way where you could see everything graphically with a list here. So I could see my different picture files, and if I wanted to navigate all of my plugins, and if I didn't want to see the pictures, we could just disable this particular icon. But we don't have pictures of every single plugin in the world. So when we come here, let's say we were accused by many users of only favoring Steinberg plugins because we knew what our plugins user interfaces looked like when we went to the different icons here. So, we knew what a Groove Agent looked like, what Hallian looked like. So if you had a third party plugin, and let's say we instantiated it, and you wanted to add and create your own pictures, at that point, you could just take a snapshot of it. And so for any third party plugin, it would show up and you'd see the graphic image. And that's what that camera icon does. Okay, so let's go back to our feed. Thanks to everyone for great questions. We'll keep going. Okay. Just checking the time, make sure I'm not running over. Okay, so question. Can I use Logical Editor to replace kick samples in an entire project? So let me just jump over here to a new project. You don't need to do the Logical Editor for this. All right, let me just find a kick sample or two. All right, I have a project I could open up very quickly. Let me do that. All right, so let's say if I had, all these different kick samples like used in this particular example here. And I wanted to replace all of this one sample that I used in the project. let me just find it. So I just have kick drum selected here. Let me just find some audio samples. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's say I have some different kicks here. All you have to do is just hold down the shift key and drag from the media bay and drag it right over, and you'll get this message. If that file has been used, the same file repeatedly, do you want to modify all the events? You could just say modify all. So I could just, even while it's playing, hold down the shift key. And just drag it over one of them. And that will automatically replace the particular sample. Okay, so I see a question: how to transpose the tracks after you see the interval in the transport. In the transport track and made the transposition final and take the transpose track away. I think you call it flatten the transposition. Okay, so if you're not familiar with this, we'll just open up our project we were listening to a bit earlier. Okay, so let's say if we want to transpose. So if we could add a transpose track. So I can now just. So say I want to go up one semitone. So, and that will be kind of basically doing, I think if we exported it, that it would automatically incorporate that. But let me just take a look on the transpose track itself. So I think if we just chose to export that, and I know with some of the files, if you do different processing, like in the sample editor, so let's say if I choose to go into the sample editor, that there's the process where you could where you could choose to flatten the processing. But I'm not sure if you need to do it for the transpose like that. I think if you just do that and export it, it should it should do it. But I could play a little bit more around with it. Okay, so a question: can you explain the library creator in Halion 6? That could take kind of an entire hangout itself. But basically, what it's going to allow you to do is within Halion, you could have your own samples, combine it with synthesis, and be able to create your own instruments. And that's what the library creator is. And I can see if I could have something a little more prepared for the next hangout. If you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Should be able I'll see if I could do that. And I know I will try to get to the spectral layers more for the next Hangout as well. Sorry, my schedule got busy. Okay, I saw a video where you could type the letter A into the EQ and the frequency would be 110 hertz, but that did not work for me. Do I have to change something in preferences? Thanks. You may have to type the actual, not just A, because, A could be 110, 220, 440, 880, 1760. But when you're in the EQ, so what you could do with the EQ is, let's say on our vocal, you need to type in the frequency. So once we come here, just double click and type in like A2. A3. So as you do that, so you may need to type in A1, A2, A3 just to know what octave it is, because, A could be obviously multiple frequencies. Okay, so we have a question. Can you explain new library in the file menu? Okay, so a lot of times when we have people that are working, let's say for more corporate stuff or composers, I remember, Hans Zimmer telling me one of the things that he often does is, has like a whole new set of sounds and samples that he works with for each film project, and make sure that it's always something different and fresh. But sometimes you may have to do a sequel and you may need to use particular sounds. So if you have your pool window set up, and we see this with a lot of composers where they may have a collection of audio files that they manipulate, they play, they have in their project, they, sample, they, run it into Groove Agent or the sampler track and do all sorts of great things. And then once, if they need to also call that up later, that collection of sounds, that's what a library is. So I think if we come over here, you could export, if we come here, we could export a pool. So I'll just call this Hangout. And let's say I was composing for a TV show. I'll just kind of pop back. Let's just put it on my desktop. So we'll have a Hangout pool. Okay. And I'm going to save that. So let's say I was, and I needed to do like, corporate things like, I'm working for CNN, I'm working for ABC. We need to do the da, 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 or whatever little audio tag cues. You may want to, just simply have those files always available to access. So if I do a new project, and it was like, okay, I need to access my sound effects and all the sounds I did from that film. I could just come over here and let's see if I did it correctly. We could just say, here is that pool in this file, and I could just have an independent collection of audio files from that. So that's what the library functionality would do. Okay, so question, can you please explain the use and advantages of the control room? Thanks. So from William from New Hampshire. So let's just jump back to my project here. All right, so one of the main intentions of the control room is to have a separate monitoring path. So, and what we want to be able to do is a lot of times we would, get this call from our tech support that, people connected their audio interface directly to their powered monitors, and they used their master fader as their volume control. And if they had their speakers cranked up, they realized that when they do this, they had their master volume down, they would export, and then their file would be very soft. It's like, why isn't it loud? It must be a problem in Cubase. And we say, where's your master fader at? They're like, oh, it's at minus 40 dB. And as you do an export audio mix down of your project, this is taken into account. So one of the main intentions of the control room was to have a separate layer for monitoring and headphone mixes. So if I wanted to come here, I could adjust the volume of the project for monitoring purposes that doesn't affect the gain structure of the mix itself. We could also dim. So if you wanted to automatically go down by, a specific amount of dB, and you could set the dim amount here. You could also have a known reference level. So if you want to come here, you could just kind of say, this is my known level, click Alt or Option. And then you could just say, this is the loudest I want to actually mix at. You could also have your metronome active here. And if you wanted to switch between, if you have multiple sets of speakers, like let's say you have Yamahas and JBLs and Genelecs and an Ortone, you could connect these to the audio outputs of your interface. And instead of having a piece of hardware which ultimately colors the sound, we could just kind of come right here and switch between different speakers. We'll also have different downmix presets. So if you want to listen to it in mono or stereo. And if you want to have these tabs open, just hold down a control key. You could also say, I only want to hear it out of specific speakers, and also for doing headphone mixes so that people could have different headphone mixes. So when they track, they could hear, if they're a guitar player, they could hear more of themselves versus the main mix in the control room. So those are some of the aspects of the control room that are really handy. Okay, and I just see like 2 questions ahead. I was just reading, hello from Las Vegas. I saw you at the NAMM show. My wife is in a wheelchair. I remember. Good to see you on a hangout. New install, new computer, no metronome sound. So this is kind of something that can creep up if you're doing the control room. Make sure that the metronome is active through the control room. It's this little button here. So when people call me up, it's like, I've done everything, and I can't hear the metronome. It's probably just disabled in the control room. Okay, so we had a question, how to only paste the time signatures that I copied, now automatically paste a few more after, which I didn't. All right, so let's take a look at that. We'll do a new project. I'll add a signature track and turn my snap on real quick. Okay, so let's say okay, so let me just select these. I'll just do Control Command C. I'll come here, paste. So that seemed right. Okay, I'll select some in the middle here. Copy those. Copy here. Let me paste. So our last one is 6/8. So it may be just, I'm not sure if it's going back to the default key signature, the default tempo. Let me just try this here. I'll try ending, selecting. Yeah, it seems to always put a 4/4 at the end. So um, I'm not sure. I could play around with that, but I'll mention it to developers. Okay, hi Greg. Vienna here. How can I close volume on only one region? Thank you. I'm not sure what close volume is, but maybe. Let's say if I have something like this, and like if we have an automation track, just to. I'm not sure if that's closing volume. Maybe if you could reiterate. Um, so okay, so I see a question every time from Miami, Florida. Every time I do a tempo detection, my Cubase 10 crashes. Any solution? Try to hold down the your Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift right after starting Cubase, and try to um, try to temporarily disable preferences. But I've done tempo detection a lot without issues in version 10. Okay, it's a comment. Greg, there are a lot of really powerful audio and MIDI editing tools as I'm discovering. All right, yeah, Cubase does lots of good stuff. So, okay, so I see a question. Can you implement an auto LFO? So, yeah, we showed how to do that a bit earlier. I know for non CC controllable stuff, it could be a little tricky, but once you get it done once, you don't, it's pretty simple. So we covered that, I think, at the very top of the Hangout. Yeah, and that's assignable to everything, Roger. Just wondering, now that you're showing the sidechain into the retrolog filter, can you use that to get similar effect to Pete Townsend's Who Are You guitar? Yeah, I think you could. I think that might be more of an envelope follower. But yeah, you could definitely do some stuff like that to get those types of sounds. That kind of sound. So, sorry, I wish I could sing. All right. Okay. Okay, zoomed into a track and dragging the end to copy it. The screen leaves from where I am and goes to the end of the new copy. How can I stop from doing this and staying exactly where I am? Okay, so we'll just zoom in on a particular track here. Okay. Okay, so I think what you're doing is maybe just going, let's say, to the right edge here. All right, so let me just zoom in here. All right, so I'll just copy it a bunch of times. Okay. One way I'll try, so it will kind of go and follow the end destination, which kind of makes sense. But let's say if I just select this event here, and if I just hit Control or Command D, it looks like it will automatically stay with the start of that event. But that's another way to. And let me just see if if that's an editing preference, perhaps. I'll see if I could get that. See if I get a way to maybe just how it works, but I could see where that could maybe not be as practical if that's not what you want. Okay, so yeah, all right, so okay, so I'm saying a shout out to me for I guess the hangout. I hope people are learning some tips. And if you like the hangout, feel free to go ahead and give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Okay. Okay, in MIDI recording, is it possible to stop recording and then record a new lane but have the previous lanes muted, as is the case with cycle record or with audio recording? All right, so let's give it a quick try. I'm not sure if we can. Okay, I'll just go to my different MIDI record modes. Okay, so let's say I'll just... I just want to check my record mode again. Okay. And if I hit record, that would be helpful. Okay, I'll do one more pass. Okay. So those are the 3 different recordings. Once I go to open up the lanes. So once I click here, okay. Okay, but it's... So, but those all will kind of sound. So I don't know a way... I could play around with it some more if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de and see there may be a way to create a macro to mute the event before doing it, but it could probably take a little long to build one. But I think you might be able to do that. But okay, so we'll move on to the next question. Okay, it says I added attributes and tags on my samples and MIDI files using MediaBay. How is the best way to back up this information so I don't need to redo it in case I format my CPU and reinstall Cubase? All that information is going to be stored in, I believe it's called a MediaBay.db file. That'll be, I think it's in your preferences. So look for your MediaBay.db file. And once you have everything kind of set up, just kind of, put it onto a flash drive. And then you could load it into any computer and all your tags will work as expected. Okay, so we have a question. How can I create multiple MIDI tracks with default MIDI to channel set to any for all the tracks? It may not be a good thing to do for, if, just reread the question again. How can I create multiple MIDI tracks with default MIDI channel set to any for all tracks? So let me just see if I think it may just automatically add. I'll close this lane, and let's say if we set this to any. Yeah, I mean, you could save a MIDI track as a preset, as a track preset with any, but I'm not sure what the use case would be because you'd probably want a particular MIDI channel for the most part, you know, and for that to be channelized to go out to a specific device. Question: how can I create a MIDI track? So you know, you could just right click and you could add an instrument track that'll be routed to a VST instrument, or a MIDI track that could be routed to a VST instrument or to an external. So I could just say, let's add a MIDI track and do that. If you wanted to export a standard MIDI file, you could go to File menu to export MIDI file. Okay, so yes, I think Mark Edwards is on the Hangout. So the question, you know, do you have any extra info on the VST Connect 4 tutorial you're working on? So I'll have to give Mark Edwards a call, but I was going to be doing it in conjunction with him, and I'll see if he has some time over the weekend. But yeah. Question: you can also use the marker drop-down menu in a track to quickly navigate to the marker. Yeah, that's a great point as well. Okay, what's an easy way to record MIDI triggered samples, i.e. drum samples, back into Cubase? All right, so let's take a look at that. I will go ahead and just add. So I'll click here, and let's say I want to add an instrument track, and let's say a Groove Agent SE. Okay, let's add that track. I will add a group track. And let's add a stereo audio track. Okay. I'll just make this stereo. Okay, so I have a Groove Agent kit loaded here and wanted to kind of easily pass the audio from that. So I'm going to route the audio output of Groove Agent here to the group. So now when I click on the samples, you can see it in Groove Agent and the group channel. And now I will take this audio track, and its input will come from group 1. So now I could place that track into record. And then at this point, all right, and now, so basically the output of Groove Agent was sent to a group. The group output was sent back to my audio in, and now it's recorded that as audio information right here. So we can now just play it back. And if you wanted to split up samples, you could go to your audio menu, and under processes, we could just say, okay, let's go to silence, and you could adjust the threshold to something that's probably a little better for that. So if you wanted to come here, so if you want to go to your direct offline processing, you could choose a process like silence. That was in here, silence. and you could adjust the range. I have too much of a threshold on there, but you could just come there. So that's how you could take the audio output from like a drum machine and just record it and pass it as audio. So if you wanted to, you could also just record both MIDI and audio simultaneously. So I know people do this. So I have both of those record enabled. I'll just come here. We'll just hit record. And now as I hit notes, if I had it set up right, then I don't have any samples loaded. So we just load up Kit. Sorry. So now as I would hit that, you could record both the MIDI and the audio simultaneously, which is handy in a lot of different scenarios. Okay, so question, how to handle lyrics and how they align with sections. I use the arranger track and draw in the verse, chorus, which helps. Usually lyrics also in project window. I've been trying to get like a lyric track for a long time, but what I see a lot of people do is just add multiple markers. And this could be helpful. You know, if you go to the project notepad, one of the things, so I'll add a marker track first here. And then you could do this kind of almost for every line if you wanted to. So you could just kind of come here, and in the description, you know, you could you could have a couple lines. You know, I'm a great librettist. And when you do that, those would automatically show up directly in the project window that you could see. So that's one way that I do it. And sometimes to make it a little more obvious, you could colorize it. And I know people wondering where I got so many colors from, probably. And it's like if you go to the project color setup, you could just kind of come here and set the number of basic colors to 32. Make sure you go to presets and number of color tints and sort it by basic colors, and then you could get more colors available. But this is a kind of easy way to, when someone's like, oh, go to this line, you could have it kind of spread out and probably see the lyrics a little easier. Okay. Okay, I'm a Cubase newbie. This channel seems like a great place to learn Cubase, but I can't seem to install it. Anyone else have any handy tips for installing? Usually the installer is pretty straightforward. We have a lot of people that are just kind of getting into the Cubase, the Stay Home Elements collection. So if you're one of those people, we will be doing a Hangout Monday for that. So, you may want to check that out, but there's some different installations. Because I know when you get that, you probably get a digital access code. You put that in your My Steinberg account. So you create a My Steinberg account, and then you could get the e-licenser codes. But there are tutorials on that. So hopefully you'll get it, watch some of those tutorial videos. And then once you get that, then you could, get up to speed and learn all the great things that Cubase can do. So it says, hello, after randomizing MIDI note positions, is there a way to remove overlaps from the end of notes? So let's take a quick look. Thanks everyone for the wonderful questions. So some things to try. Let's look under the MIDI functions. I think you might be able to let's see. So try going into the MIDI, into functions, and choosing delete overlaps poly and see if that does a trick for you. Because you see when I did that, I had these notes that were overlapping, and MIDI functions delete overlaps poly, and that might do it for you. Okay. Okay, so question, is there a setting that changes the selected track if you open a MIDI region to edit so that when you play the keyboard, you hear the sound from that instrument? So I think if let's say if I have a MIDI track here and I'm double clicking, I think if we go to preferences, we will see under editing that I think there might be a preference for this. Okay, so try track selection follows event selection. So this way, if I have this selected, so I think that would be the preference you're looking for. So again, preferences, editing, track selection follows event selection. So I'll just, if I did it right, let's say I have this. So as you would select the event, that particular track gets selected. Okay. Okay, we'll go through a couple more questions. I thank everyone for all the great questions. I hope everyone's learned a couple of tips and tricks. Okay, requesting more Roland TR 808 style kits and Groove Agent. There are lots of different Groove Agent expansions, so definitely check that out. There's maybe 12 to 15 different libraries, expansion libraries with all sorts of different stuff. We'll go through maybe one more question. Let me see. I know we had some people. Let me just check. I know we had some emailed in. I'll make sure. Okay, so we had a question mailed in. I had Cubase 10 Pro and Absolute 4. I have a question about strum guitar. Halligan 6 had a few presets. How can I create my own strum for guitar. Steinberg come out with T guitars. Like I spent $1,000 already. I hope I don't have to buy the T guitar to simulate. So yeah, you could definitely, the Taylor guitar is actually recordings of someone that's played the guitar, and there's different ways of doing, MIDI arpeggios. And one of the things that you could do is also just, very easily, come here. And one of the MIDI plugins that you could have is an Arpeggio. So, find a guitar strum MIDI file, and there's lots of them online, and you could even take one from the Hallion, and you have a sequence, and you could just drag and drop any sequence and use that as the arpeggiator. So you can come up with some really good guitar strumming patterns there. Excuse me for my coughing. All right, and we'll do one more question about, is it possible to just transcribe MIDI, notation straight from the notation editor? So, if you wanted to come here, let's say we have a part, we could just, we could select the event and go directly into our score editor. So, there's any number of ways. You could make sure that you have the step and MIDI input enabled. Like if you're just starting from scratch, you could double click. I wanted this to be, a grand staff. So I could say, let's make this a split staff or a piano. And if you just want to, you could, excuse me, come over here, set your quantize to, let's say 1/4. And sorry, a little trickle in my throat. And now you could just hit the notes to go ahead and transcribe. So you could, switch your quantized value to eighth notes and, just play in the pitches from your MIDI keyboard, or you could drop them in with your mouse as well. So it's very easy to do transcriptions directly into the score editor. All right, my son is knocking on the door. He's telling me my time is up for the Hangout. I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions. I hope that everyone has learned a couple of tips and tricks. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. We try to answer them as completely and succinctly as possible. If you want to send questions in advance, you could email them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. We know that people have a lot more time with the different health situation that's going on around the world. So we're trying to do 2 of these Hangouts a week. So we'll be doing another Club Cubase Google Hangout at the same time on Tuesday. So we'll try to go for about 3 hours there. We will also get to the point where on Monday we're going to have, for people that are just getting into the Stay Home collection of Cubase elements, Wavelab elements, Dorico elements, and the Absolute 4 collection, where we will have that set as kind of a getting started session. So we'll be doing that on Monday at 1:00, but it's going to be less of a Q&A. I hope that everyone has learned tips and tricks and that you'll be able to use it in your Cubase work. I want to make sure that everyone is, stays safe and is healthy, so that, everyone can come out of the other side of this situation. But we want you to be able to learn more about your Cubase, to be able to use it better and faster. So thanks again for everyone from around the world being on to Hangout, and we appreciate it, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Thank you.